Yashodanandana Prajajananjana
Yashodanandana Prajajananjana
Yamunatiravanachari
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 Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Kodanitai Mayapur Shashi, Kodanitai Mayapur Shashi, Jaya Kodanitai Jaya Mayapur Shashi, Jaya Kodanitai Mayapur Shashi. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada,
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paravarakacharya Astotara Sata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Sri Sri Koda Nitai Mayapur Shashi Ki Jai Sadhu Sangha Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Pramananda. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, it's text 11, right? Text 11. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 10. Maharaj Vahugana meets Jad Bharat, text number 11. Jivan Mritatvam Niyamena Rajan.
Jivan Mritatvam Niyamena Rajan.
Jivan Mritatvan Niyamena Rajan Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Taryuchyate so vidikritya yoga Taryuchyate so vidikritya yoga Jivan Mritatvam Niyamena Rajan Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Taryutyate so vidikritya yoga Jivan Mritatvam Niyamena Rajan Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Taryutyate so vidikritya yoga. Please chant.
Jivan Vitatvam Niyamena Rajan Jivan Vitatvam Niyamena Rajan Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam
Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam
Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra
Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Taryuchyate so vidikritya yoga Jivamritatvam Niyamena Rajan Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Taryuchyate so vidikritya yoga. Ladies. Jivan Mritatvam Niyamena Rajan Adyantavadyad Vikritasya Drishtam Swaswamya Bhavo Dhruva Idya Yatra Taryuchyate so vidikritya yoga. Okay, please repeat. Jivat Mritatvam, the quality of being dead while living. Niyamena, by the laws of nature. Rajan, O King. Adyantavat, everything material has a beginning and an end. Yet, because Vikritasya, of things that are transformed, such as the body. Drishtam is seen. Swaswamya Bhava, the condition of servanthood and mastership. Dhruva, unchangeable. Idya, who are worshipped. Yatra, wherein. Karhi, then. Uchate, it is said. Aso, that. Vidhi Kritya Yoga, fitness of order and duty. Translation. My dear king, you have unnecessarily accused me of being dead though alive. In this regard, I can only say that this is the case everywhere, because everything material has its beginning and end. As far as you're thinking that you are the king and master and are thus trying to order me, this is also incorrect, because these positions are temporary. Today you are a king and I am your servant, but tomorrow the position may be changed, and you may be my servant and I your master. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The bodily conception is the basic principle of suffering in material existence. In Kali Yuga especially, people are so uneducated that they cannot even understand that the body is changing at every moment and that the ultimate change is called death. In this life one may be a king, and in the next life one may be a dog, according to karma. The spirit soul is in a deep slumber caused by the force of material nature. He is put in one type of condition and again changed into another type. Without self-realization and knowledge, conditional life continues, and one falsely claims himself a king, a servant, a cat, or a dog. Oh, excuse me. This may have to go. Hare Krishna. Where were we? I'm going to sneeze in a moment. Wait for it. He is put in one. Thank you. He is put in one type of condition and again changed into another type. Without self-realization and knowledge, conditional life continues, and one falsely claims himself a king, a servant, a cat, or a dog. These are simply different transformations brought about by the supreme arrangement. One should not be misled by such temporary bodily conceptions. Actually, no one is master within the material world, for everyone is under the control of material nature, which is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the ultimate master. As explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ekali Ishvara Krishna Ara Sabhabritya. The only master is Krishna, and everyone else is his servant. Forgetfulness of our relationship with the Supreme Lord brings about our suffering in the material world. Excuse me. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapatam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vatantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parajana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastichade Shatarane Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindube Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. My dear king, you have unnecessarily accused me of being dead though alive. In this regard, I can only say that this is the case everywhere, because everything material has its beginning and end. As far as you are thinking, you are the king and master and are thus trying to order me. This is also incorrect, because these positions are temporary. Today you are a king and I am your servant, but tomorrow the position may be changed, and you may be my servant and I your master. These are temporary circumstances created by providence. So, as always, many nice points in Srila Prabhupada's purport. Yeah, it's interesting. The very first sentence and the very last sentence basically say the same thing but from different angles. So in the very beginning, Srila Prabhupada says, the bodily conception is the basic principle of suffering in material existence. And then at the end, he says, forgetfulness of our relationship with the Supreme Lord brings about our suffering in the material world. And then he says a very interesting thing just near the beginning of the purport. He says, in Kali Yuga especially, people are so uneducated that they cannot even understand that the body is changing at every moment and that the ultimate change is called death. Hands up who went to college or university. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So most of us. And Prabhupada saying in Kali Yuga we're all just so uneducated. Actually, at this point in history, there's never been a time in modern history where people have been more educated than they are right now in terms of academic education. You know, if we go back, 100 or 200 years, and we look at how many people actually went to college, went to university, got, actually became qualified, became recognized in terms of their academic education, it was very, 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 very minimal. I was even listening this morning to one class, and one devotee was saying that actually, if you go back maybe 100 years or so, even medical doctors and lawyers didn't receive academic training as such. They had apprenticeships. They worked under another lawyer or under another doctor, and that's how they got their education. So right now, there's a huge emphasis on education, so, and Srila Prabhupada wasn't unaware of this. He at the time that he wrote this is the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada was well and truly, he'd been traveling around the world for a number of years. Most of the people who he was speaking to were Americans and Europeans. So he was well aware of the fact that, most of his students were sort of coming from colleges, universities. Many of them were PhD graduates and so on. But still, Prabhupada's saying people are so uneducated. So, what actually is education in the absolute sense of the term? Because we have relative knowledge, relative education, which is relative to the material world and to the material body. And actually, Prabhupada saying in the beginning, this is actually this is the basic cause of our suffering in the material world, that when we have this very, very, very deep-rooted education and intellectual and mental conception that we are the body, then that is actually the root cause of all the problems in the world. That's just the root cause of all the problems, all the difficulties and all the suffering. So what Prabhupada is emphasizing is that, spiritual education, this is the missing ingredient. And Srila Prabhupada would make this point often, that there are so many universities and educational institutions in the world, and they're teaching so many different areas and branches of knowledge. But where is that knowledge that teaches who we actually are? Who am I? And this is the foundation of the knowledge which will actually free us from our suffering. We've been, for those who've been like Laura's here, and there may be some online as well, we've been studying the Bhagavad Gita for the last few months. And when we were studying chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita for the Gita Life course, then the acronym for chapter 2 is Gita, which means Guru, Identity, Two Duties, and Atmarama. And since we've moved away from that chapter, every single week we keep going back to this point over and over and over again. Whatever chapter we're studying, we always end up referring to this point in chapter 2, that knowledge of identity and knowledge that we don't just have one duty in the material world, i.e. the duty to maintain our material bodies, to maintain our bodily existence, to help maintain and support the sort of physical, bodily, mental, intellectual existence of those who depend upon us. You know, this is one duty, and it is a duty. It would be wrong to say that this is not a duty. You know, getting academic education, finding a way to maintain ourselves financially, finding a way to support those people, our children, our loved ones, our family members, so on, who depend upon us. You know, we can't say that's not one of our duties in the world. It is one of our duties, and to do that, we need education, we need qualification, we need training. All these things have to be there. So this is one of our duties. But unfortunately, the educational system that exists for the most part in the world is completely dominated by that one single duty. But Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that we don't just have one duty, we have two duties, because the first thing that Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita, the very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, basically, because chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita is really, it says, observing the armies on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and prior to that, Srila Prabhupada gives this little preface setting the scene. So chapter 1 is really just setting the scene. It's just, this is where we are. This is where the Bhagavad Gita is going to be spoken. But the actual Bhagavad Gita itself, the Song of God, this is what Bhagavad Gita means. You know, Krishna barely says anything in chapter 1. Now see, O Partha, all the generals assembled here. That's pretty much all Krishna says in the whole of chapter 1. And everything else is Sanjaya, Dhritarashtra and Arjuna. They're the people who are speaking in chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita. So the Song of God, Krishna's actual song, the Bhagavad Gita itself, begins in chapter 2. And it begins after Arjuna surrenders to Krishna and asks him to solve his dilemma, solve the dilemma that he's facing on the battlefield. And the first thing that Krishna teaches, and he doesn't just teach it, you know, in a passing way. He spends 20 verses, one after the other, from text 10 through till text 30. Just one verse after another, metaphors, analogies, different descriptions, different ways of presenting who am I? You are not the body, you are the spirit soul. What is the spirit soul? What are the qualities of the spirit soul? What is the nature of the spirit soul? And Krishna just, you know, really intensely, this is the foundation. This is the foundation of everything else that we're going to be taught in the Bhagavad Gita. And everything else that we're going to learn in the Bhagavad Gita, and everything else that we're going to learn in the postgraduate study of the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and everything that we're going to learn in the postgraduate study of the Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, is ultimately resting on these 20 verses that Krishna speaks in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. You are not the body, you are the spirit soul. That's who you are. And and everything that Krishna says in the rest of the Bhagavad Gita is seen through the lens of that understanding, that I'm not this material body, I'm the spirit soul. So this is the foundation of knowledge. This is the foundation of spiritual knowledge. Not just that we're the spirit soul, you know, to know that we're not the body with the spirit soul, that's the beginning. But who is the spirit soul? What is the spirit soul? What is the nature of the spirit soul? We're all individual living entities. You know, Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor any of these kings. You know, we're all individual spirit souls. And what is the nature of the spirit soul? Prabhupada says here in the purport that everyone is under the control of material nature, which is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the spirit soul is Tatastha Shakti, which means we're marginal potency, which means that there's never a time, there will never be a time when we're not under the control of Krishna. So there is Krishna's internal potency, the spiritual energy, and there is Krishna's external potency, the material world. And depending on where we happen to be situated, and depending on what our consciousness happens to be, we're either going to be under the control of the material energy or we're going to be under the control of the spiritual energy. There's never a time when we're going to be independent controllers. So this is one of the things that we need to know about ourselves, that as long as we're trying to be the controller, as long as we're trying to be the Lord of all I survey, then this is the bodily conception of life, which Srila Prabhupada says here is the basic principle of suffering in the material existence. And then we can take that further and look at the end of the purport. What is the root cause of the bodily conception of life? It is forgetfulness of our relationship with the Supreme. So knowledge of relationship with the Supreme, this is the beginning of knowledge. So this is, you have Abhideya, Prayojana, and then what is Sambandha. Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So these are the three areas of knowledge. And Lord Chaitanya in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he even says that in the entirety of the Vedic pantheon of knowledge, in all the spiritual wisdom which exists in the world, every verse which is spoken comes under one of these three categories, either Sambandha, Abhideya, or Prayojana. So Sambandha means knowledge of our relationship with the Supreme, which is the basic principle of the Bhagavad Gita, knowledge of our relationship with the Supreme. And then Sambandha Abhideya means knowledge of how to go about re-establishing that relationship. What is the actual practical way by which we can live our lives, and what are the practical spiritual practices which we can adopt in our lives so that we can actually awaken that knowledge of relationship, awaken realization of that relationship. Because we're not just looking for knowledge, we're looking for realization, we're looking for an awakening of knowledge. Because what is it? Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunoi Shravanadi Shuddha Chiti Karyodoi. Pure love for Krishna is already there in the heart of all living entities. It's not something to be gained from somewhere else. It's something which is in our hearts. And the process of hearing and chanting about Krishna awakens that knowledge within ourselves. So we're not trying to get something from somewhere else. We're trying to awaken something from within ourselves. And so Prayojana, Abhideya is the process of how to actually go about awakening the realization of our relationship with Krishna. Sambandha is knowledge of the relationship with Krishna, but awakening that from within the heart. This is Prayojana. And when that pure love for Krishna is fully awakened within the heart, that's Prayojana. So Prayojana means the goal of our relationship, the ultimate fruit of our relationship with Krishna is pure love for Krishna, Krishna Prema. So this is the ultimate highest perfection of spiritual realization, is to fully awaken our pure love for Krishna. And this is education. This is education. So other education is there. We have one duty. But then if we neglect our eternal education, that's actually, that comes up also in chapter 4 when we were doing the Gita life. Then chapter 4, the acronym is EARS, which means eternal education, accurate understanding, removing reactions, and sacrifice. It's really good, actually. Devotees should study these things. It really helps you to kind of remember where things are in the Bhagavad Gita. But eternal education system. So the beginning of chapter 4, Krishna, he establishes, this is the eternal education system. So the educational system which exists in our sort of academic institutions and world, which are very, very necessary in order that, there will always be a need for professionals and, qualified people in the world. There's always going to be a need for doctors and lawyers and all these other things. But what is the eternal education system, and what is the more important educational system? It is the eternal educational system which Krishna teaches in the beginning of chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita. Evam parampara plaptami mamrajasil vidusa kalenamha mahata yoganasta parantapa. That this supreme science of spiritual realization has descended through the disciplic succession from time immemorial. And the saintly kings, it was meant for the saintly kings. So not just meant for the brahmanas and the saints and the sages, but it's meant for the kings and the administrators, so that they can govern and organize society not based on mundane morals and principles, but on eternal spiritual morals and principles. I had a nice experience last night. Kripa Moya Prabhu was he was doing one of his he does 2 a week, or is it one? 2 a week, yeah. I usually tune in on Monday generally. Usually I'm doing service at other times. So I listened to a little bit of it last night, and he was telling all these beautiful stories from the Mahabharata. And I asked the question that, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and all these stories, they're so captivating and so absorbing. But actually Lord Chaitanya, he came to give Raj Bhakti. He came to give pure love for Krishna in the mood of the residents of Vrindavan. But when we're hearing the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, it's like you can actually forget all about Vrindavan, because the stories are just so captivating that you forget everything else apart from that. So how is it that we can hear these stories but not lose sight of the ultimate goal? So he gave a really nice answer. He was saying that, all the stories like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Puranas, the Upanishads, all these different stories, they're all there in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But when we listen to those stories outside of the Srimad Bhagavatam, then oftentimes they are focused on the sort of more sort of material morals and principles. And even Narada Muni, after Vyasadeva had compiled the Mahabharata and all the other Vedas, Narada Muni said, you've compiled all these great works, even the Mahabharata, but you haven't emphasized Krishna's role within these stories. You haven't emphasized the principle of pure devotional service. So now you have to write the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Kripa Mahaprabhu was saying that when we hear these stories through the lens of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and in the Bhagavatam, always pure devotional service is emphasized. So when we understand the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and all these stories through the lens of the Bhagavatam, then understanding it through the lens of pure bhakti, then that takes us to Vraj, that takes us to Vrindavan. So, it's not that we should ignore the need for morals and principles and values in the world. In fact, in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita, I opened it right on the verse. I swear to you, it just landed right on the verse, and it's not even the bookmark. It just landed right on the verse. That is amazing. Krishna teaches what are the items of knowledge. I can't believe that. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement, with children, wife, home, and the rest. That means entanglement with family. It's not just, it's whether we're men or women, it's, becoming free from that entanglement. Even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be, is ignorance. So, but interestingly, even many of these are more moral principles, cleanliness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, these things in and of themselves are not necessarily spiritual values. But Srila Prabhupada really emphasizes in the purport that out of these 19, is that right? Is it 19 or is it 20 qualities? Without me counting them, anyone remember? Can't remember. Anyway, 19 or 20 qualities, we won't count them right now. But out of all of them, the most important one is, constant and unalloyed devotion to me. And as long as that one is there, then everything else falls into place. But if that is not there, then we may have good material values and good material qualities, but we're still missing that vital ingredient of constant unalloyed devotion to Krishna. But we see that many of these also, their qualities, their qualities. So Krishna's saying this is knowledge. And, when we think of knowledge, my sort of understanding of knowledge prior to any understanding of the Bhagavad Gita was that if you can memorize enough information, if you can sort of repeat information without, I'm trying not to use the word regurgitate because it's quite a heavy word, but if we can show that we can retain information, then that basically qualifies us in the world. Okay, you've demonstrated that you can retain and repeat and present information that we've presented to you, so therefore here is your qualification. Now you're qualified to be whatever, this or that or the next thing. But actually the thing which Krishna's really emphasizing is qualities. Having good qualities in life is the more important aspect of knowledge, is the more important aspect of education. That actually having, the ability to control our senses, to control our mind, to have good morals, good values, and most importantly of all, to have this most important ingredient of constant and unalloyed devotion to Krishna. And then if that's there as the foundation, then everything else works as well. So if we look at, the whole principle of Varnashram, particularly in the context of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, is that, be the best version of yourself. We all have our own natural qualities in life, and we all have our own natural tendencies, and we're all going to engage in an occupation or in a field of work which is suitable according to our nature. But if we add Krishna to that, if we add Krishna to the world, then basically the world becomes perfect. And by adding the ingredient of Krishna, then anything undesirable within the world will naturally just dispel in due course of time. Krishna says in the 4th chapter of the Gita that Yada yada hi dhammasya glani bhavati bharata bhutanamadanammasya taratmanam srijamyaham. Whenever and whenever there is a decline in religious principles and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chaduskritam dhammasamstapanataya sambhavami yuge yuge. To annihilate the miscreant, to deliver the devotees and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish religious principles, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So when Krishna comes, he comes to remove unwanted influences from the world. And devotees very often ask this question again and again, well then why isn't he here now? Because it's Kali Yuga, everything's terrible, there's so many unwanted things in the world, why isn't Krishna appearing right now? In fact, why isn't he appearing every single week during Kali Yuga? He appeared 500 years ago, but things are much worse now, so why doesn't he keep coming again and again? But in Kali Yuga, Krishna doesn't only advent as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He advents as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he advents as the holy name, he advents as the Srimad Bhagavatam. These are all incarnations of Krishna who appear in Kali Yuga. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared, 5,000 years ago, Krishna appeared in the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then 500 years ago, Krishna appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Both of these are incarnations who have appeared in Kali Yuga. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared, he then empowered, I don't know if that's the right word, he empowered the Maha Mantra with this potency to bless one with pure love of Krishna, Krishna Prema. So, along with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the holy name, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, also advented simultaneously with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu disappeared from our vision, after 48 years of his earthly pastimes, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra remained. And this is the incarnation for this age. This is really the avatar for Kali Yuga, is the Maha Mantra, the holy name. Harinam, Harinam, Harinam eva kevalam, kalu nasteva, nasteva, nasteva gatiranyata. In the age of Kali, there is no other means of deliverance, no other means of deliverance, no other means of deliverance, nasteva, 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 but the chanting of the holy name. And Krishna is fully present. Not just that he's fully present within the name. One devotee was giving class once in Vrindavan, and when he was giving class, he said, Krishna is in his name, and Srila Prabhupada was sitting there. Could you imagine giving class and Srila Prabhupada is sitting next to you, listening to your class? I mean, here he is sitting here, he is listening to our class, So Prabhupada said, oh, he's in the holy name, is he? Whereabouts is he in his holy name? The devotee's didn't know what to say. And Srila Prabhupada said, he's not in his holy name, he is his holy name. The holy name is Krishna. The Hare Krishna Mahamantra is Krishna. So when we add the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Krishna's names, not just the Mahamantra, all of Krishna's names, Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Shava Shaktis Trapatanya Matas Maranena Kala. Oh my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benedictions to living beings, and thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda, etc. So just chanting these names of Krishna, this is Krishna. And when Krishna appears, Paritranaya Sadhunam Vinashaya Chaduskritam, the unwanted things disappear. Unwanted things are removed. So if we add Krishna to the world in the form of his names, and the more we add Krishna's names to the world, the more we chant, the more we sing, the more we encourage other people to chant and to sing Krishna's names, then to that degree, whatever is wanted and whatever is needed will remain. But whatever is unwanted and whatever is unfavorable, Krishna will remove that, because Krishna comes to remove unwanted things from the world. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish religious principles. I appear millennium after millennium. So Krishna has appeared in the form of his name, and it's up to us to take Krishna's incarnation in the form of his name out into the world and to give that name to the world. And the more Krishna's name is there in the world, the more unwanted things will disappear. But it's kind of, the process of purification is like the process of turning butter into ghee. So for anyone that's made ghee, you have butter, and then you heat up the butter, and all the impurities in the butter rise up to the surface. So, sometimes people are saying, well, why is it that things appear to be getting worse? Well, one of the reasons might be because we're doing something right. Because when you're actually adding that fire, when you're adding that heat to the world, the unwanted things first of all rise to the surface and then disappear. Disappear. So this is real. This is the highest principle of knowledge and education. And if this is there, then everything else falls into place as well. And again, it's not that we neglect our material needs and duties. These things have to be there. Education, qualification, employment, all these things need to be there. But the most important ingredient of all is this education and knowledge of Krishna consciousness. So we can ask those who are watching online that if there's any questions, if there's any comments, please write them down. Is there anything right now? Okay, so we can take whatever's there now, and then we can ask the devotees here if they have anything, and then also if anyone wants to add anything to that, then they can.
Ekaterina is making a comment, reflection. I think a big challenge is to balance the two duties. It's so easy to spend more time on one and neglect the other. I found that I tend to spend more time on spiritual duty, forgetting that the material duty is just as important, and that if I don't take care of the material duty, then I won't be able to carry out my spiritual duty.
I listened about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Mahatma Prabhu was having a discussion, and he was talking about this need for balance. That as devotees we need to be balanced. We need to be balanced in our sort of conception of things in general. Even in our conception of spiritual life, we need to be balanced. If we become too extreme, too fanatical, either end, too conservative, too liberal. He made a nice point actually, and I know it's going a little off topic, but he was saying that because quite often you have this sort of battle that goes on between conservative and liberal. Should we be liberal or should we be conservative? So he's saying, you know, what is the meaning of the word conservative? It means to conserve. It means to conserve important, necessary values and principles. What's the meaning of liberal? So when you look at Srila Prabhupada, if you type in the word liberal into all of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, the word that you get back is Mahatma, broad-minded. So, you know, we're not conservative or liberal. We're just balanced. You know, we conserve the things that need to be conserved, but we're also broad-minded in sense of, you know, accommodating and understanding and compassionate and practical and so on and so forth. But yeah, also in regards to our material and spiritual lives, you know, that's also why you have these different ashrams are there, and they accommodate the natural stages of life. I mean, you know, obviously there are exceptions, you know, untimely death does occur, but in the general principle of things, then Krishna has created things. Krishna says in the Gita, the four orders and statuses of life are created by me. So Varnashram is created by Krishna, and he says it in the Gita. So in Varnashram you have 4 ashrams: Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyas. And according to which one of those ashrams we happen to be situated, then the balance between material and spiritual life shifts. So in an ideal world, excuse me a second while I make horrible sounds. Excuse me. In an ideal world, the first part of our life, a good chunk of our life in the beginning, is dedicated to, well, it already is dedicated to education, but education including spiritual education. So in an ideal world, then we would have both material and spiritual education as a sort of foundation for life. But things being what they are, many of us sort of are introduced to Krishna consciousness and Bhakti Yoga around about the time that we would normally be just finishing our education. So very often late teens, early to mid-20s is often the time when we're just finding out about Krishna consciousness. And that's the point in time when Krishna recommends, that's when you sort of start, you know, you get into the Grihastha ashram, you have your material life, you have your, you have family and home and children and employment, occupation, career, all of these things happen at that time. So it's kind of, okay, making the best of a bad bargain. We need to put emphasis and focus on those things, but at the same time, try to make time for, you know, a good, solid, spiritual, educational program within our lives, program of reading and studying as much as we can. We may not become the pandits and the learned scholars or the qualified brahmacharis that we would have become had we had the opportunity of that from the very beginning of our life, but we can make the best of a bad bargain. And Krishna says in the Gita, I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. So we may be lacking certain things in our life due to having missed out on certain opportunities, but Krishna will make up for that when he sees that we're sincere. When he sees that we're doing the best that we can do. So especially when we're young, in our young adulthood through to middle age, obviously, yeah, balance needs to be there between sort of work, you know, career and spirituality. Then once we get into middle-aged, interestingly, nowadays, you know, retirement is around about sort of 65, although it's always edging further and further away. But Krishna recommends retirement around about 50. That's when we're supposed to be retiring. And then at that point, we're supposed to sort of shift the balance a bit and start putting more emphasis onto our spiritual lives, because we're getting closer and closer to the time of actually sitting our final exam, because we're talking about an educational system, but like all educational systems, there's an exam at the end. And in spiritual life, the exam is called leaving the body. Can I be conscious of Krishna when leaving the body? If I can, then I've passed my educational training. So from that sort of middle-aged period, we're supposed to shift the balance and start sort of edging away from our material sort of entanglements, start gradually unwinding those and focusing more and more on the spiritual side of things. And then if we're, I presume, fortunate enough to live till we're 70, 75 years old, then at that point Krishna recommends, okay, done, finished, all material life's done, and you're just completely 100% dedicated to spiritual life. And that's a general thing, because you know the times and the amounts of years and the different sort of details, they differ from person to person. Some people become very renounced very early on, but it has to be natural. It can't be false renunciation, otherwise that's just going to cause problems for ourselves. So balance needs to be there, but we also need to know when to shift that balance gradually. Is that okay? I hope that's okay. Kat, you can let us know if that's okay. Is there anything else online? Any questions, comments online? Anything from the devotees in the temple room? I say the devotees, it's all devotees. Anything from anyone here? Anything? Javat, Prabhu.
Thank you very much for your enlightening class. Just like the times that we're in now are kind of unprecedented in our memory, and also in the history of the kind of modern Western industrial world, in the sense that information is so readily available that academics can study like every detail about any society and about any community, and therefore then, and it seems to be having a beneficial effect in the sense that it's almost impossible to cover up like the realities, you know. It's like, you know, unless it happens to be in a state which is like heavily relying on violence, you know. So therefore, many scientists, especially in the field of psychology and sociology, are actually coming to conclusions which are actually similar to the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, you know, in the sense that they understand that you can't judge the health of an economy just by how much money it's making or how many qualifications people have, but they're starting to use more what you might call liberal ways of measuring well-being, but it's all based basically on the health of the planet, because within academic circles, so-called academic circles in the Western world, there seems to be like a complete taboo about talking about anything beyond this planet. However, we see within ISKCON today that there's a lot of communication with academic bodies and with government bodies, and there seems to be a kind of recognition that we need to cooperate with academics because we're working in that field, you know. And as you say, there are many ISKCON doctors and lawyers, and there will be in the future. So when we're talking about balance, how do we, you know, is it our responsibility to point out that lack of balance in our colleagues who we're working with in professional fields, or should we just leave that to the preachers in our movement? You know, is there a responsibility of devotees who are working in professions, you know, like teachers and doctors and business people and academics? Is it their responsibility to present the teachings of Bhagavad Gita within their disciplines, or should they rather just continue with their work in those spheres and leave the preaching, or leave the critical, you know, input up to the Brahmins and the sannyasis?
Well, I would say, and again, just to qualify it, I can give an answer. Whether it's the answer, that's another matter. It's the responsibility of all devotees to help spread the Krishna consciousness teachings. But how we go about doing that, we have to be sort of practical. So, yes, if we are in a position of influence, and if within that position of influence we are sort of able to present things to receptive audiences. So part of the sort of part of the art of sharing Krishna consciousness with others is first of all bringing people to the point where they are receptive and eager to hear things. If we try to tell people something before they want to hear it, then that can prove detrimental. So, yes, we want to be able to share things with people. Like, for instance, I'm thinking of examples, like, for instance, my godbrothers and yours, Pundarik Prabhu and Hari Krishna Devidasi, they're professional doctors. So they sort of found ways to sort of present certain things to their colleagues, but only once they had very expertly brought their colleagues to the point of actually being receptive to hearing these things. So they would do little things like wearing tilak. They wouldn't say anything, and it was just, what is that? Oh, it's just this, and then wouldn't say anything else. And then people are curious. It invites curiosity. Why? What is that all about? It's like, I remember our friend Janardhan Prabhu. He was saying that when he started his new job, well, I don't know, I'm not even sure if he's still working in that place now, but anyway, he started a new job 2 or 3 years ago, and so he had his Brahman thread, and I think he went to use the bathroom and he kind of looped his Brahman thread around his ear. So, and people were kind of looking at him, and then he came out and he said, okay, ask your questions, let's get it over with, come on. And then they asked him about it, and because they already knew him as a person, and I think that's something very important. Devanrita Maharaj, he makes this point in his city centre preaching seminars. The tactic which they've developed in New Zealand is that first of all, let people just get to know us as people. And then once they know us as people, then they will trust us enough to actually be able to go a little further. And they will naturally ask questions. They spot the odd little thing. Why are you vegetarian? Why is it that you do that thing at midday every day? But because they know you as a person, and they know that you're down to earth, you're grounded, you've got a good sense of humour, you can just interact with people, you're not just a complete mindless fanatic that puts his hands in his ears every time people are talking about other things, then they can relate to you as a person, and then it's like, okay, tell us a bit about what you're into, then you can go a little further. So definitely, if the opportunity is there, we should take any opportunity to share Krishna consciousness, but it has to be done in a way which isn't going to disturb or threaten people. So it has to be kind of, in one sense, on their terms. And then we have to try and somehow create a favourable environment for their terms, if that makes sense. Is that okay?
Yeah, I was in Mayapur in, I think it was 2012 or 2010, and Kwantir Prabhu and Bhagavatam Swami were doing a Bhakti Vriksha training for Western devotees, because the Bhakti Vriksha had already become very successful amongst Indian devotees. But when devotees tried to apply the Indian Bhakti Vriksha kind of template to Western devotees, it didn't work at all, and people felt threatened or indoctrinated. So Jayapataka Swami says that we need to study the process of what we call cultural engineering, to understand driving forces behind people's behaviour and values in different cultures that we. And it's like Prabhupada refers to as like time, place, and candidate.
Yeah, I was speaking with Chaitanya Balavar about 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about Rameshwara Prabhu. And Rameshwara was deliberately sort of having a look at what people were into in the world. So he was deliberately, okay, what music are people listening to, what kind of books are people reading, what kind of magazines, and he was even kind of having a look and having a listen. And then based upon that, they published Life Comes from Life, Chant and Be Happy, based on these other things. And then we would speak with Chaitanya Balaram and we're saying, now it's the time, now maybe some of those books aren't quite as relevant, or at least the way that they're presented is not quite as relevant now as it was then. So it's an ongoing thing. Every few years we need to look at what books are we publishing, what books are we distributing, how are we presenting things, is it actually relevant to a modern audience? I've given the example before, like maybe 10 years or so, I was in Waterstones, and there were a couple of girls, I know I've told this story before, but I could hear them talking, and one of them had obviously found a book about the Beatles, and one said to the other, oh, they were a band, weren't they? And my false ego got a bit riled up because I used to really like the Beatles. In fact, I still do a little bit. It really made me think. We're kind of saying George Harrison's into Krishna consciousness, and you just kind of get these blank faces looking back, like, who is this person? So we need contemporary ways to present. It's like Prabhupada says, the oldest of all, but in a new dress. And there was an interesting story, and I'll have to wind down, but I know Raghunath was wanting to say something as well, but there was an interesting story with Srila Prabhupada. He visited one of his godbrothers' mats in Mayapur, and while he was there, he looked at their book table display. And when he left afterwards and he went back to his room in Mayapur and he was speaking to his disciples, he said, 50 years after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati has left, and they're still only distributing his books. So it's not that we want to, personally speaking, and this is just to qualify, one of my goals in life is that every single one of our community members has got an entire library of Srila Prabhupada's books in their home. But in order to get people to the point where they're actually able to read and study Srila Prabhupada's books, do we need to be writing some other books in order to bring people to that point? And Prabhupada himself seemed to indicate that. Raghunath, you were going to share something?
Just a quick comment about, actually we just did a community, how it is called, climate literacy course for community leaders. So it's obviously quite an urgent kind of topic, for the people in the world. And one of the main challenges is all the businesses and etc. They starting to reduce it because it has become a big thing, at least for their personal image, if not for the climate. But the main challenge that is not changing, is the people's behaviors. And they still want to go other side of the world for holidays, and the consumption is massive. The changing, the fashion is changing and throwing things away and buying another thing, etc. So all the challenges there, despite of the fact, that people speak in the newspapers and on TV, and the companies, they have their thing, is not changing. So they said the most important way and effective way they feel that something is gonna change, when people in the communities, instead of parachuting somebody from somebody else and come and tell people this is like this, you shouldn't do this, but actually people inside the community in their circles of influence, when they're gonna start speaking and explaining, just a normal person from Les Mahego is speaking to a neighbor, about it in a way that they can understand, that's what is gonna make a difference, and they're gonna change. So it's just in relationship to Javed's question, how it's gonna work. There has to be somebody come and specialize in presenting it. And actually every single person in the movement, if we have this amazing message, but we just can't, bang on people's heads, actually is gonna be the normal person. And that was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's vision as well. As a normal person who is experiencing Krishna consciousness, sharing that message in among their community, friends, relatives in a way that they can understand.
And also we need to see living examples in our lives of people that are living like this. Not just one or two exceptional personalities who, like you say, come and visit from time to time and give a lecture, but you need to actually see people within your own life who are making that transformation and showing, like, this is how it's done, this is how we live like that. We should stop because we've already gone over time and I don't want to get either myself or anyone else in trouble, so we'll stop now. So thank you. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai,
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
jai, Shri Shri Kodanitai Maya Poshashi ki
Jai.
jai, Jai Gaur Rmananda.
Haribol. His Grace Ramananda Prabhu. Jai.